All right, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to Fix Your Gut News and View for the week of February the 5th, 2021. I'm your host, John Brisson. Before we begin, I'd like you to visit www.fixyourgut.com. You can get a copy of the Optimal Health Blueprint, health supplement recommendations for males and females. You can get a copy of my book, Fix Your Gut, the third edition. I'm working on the fourth edition right now. You can get gut health coaching with me, or you can get fitness coaching and diet coaching and biohack coaching with Jason Hooper. Our friends at Frontline Performance are selling the old liposomal bulletproof glutathione preparation, the only one that Jason and I knows that truly works. So we've tested it, and the glutathione is in its proper liposomal lipospheres. And of course, the only probiotic that we recommend mainly is Smidge. There's no histamine producing strains or delactate producing strains in Smidge. Smidge used to be Gut Pro. So definitely visit www.fixyourgut.com for all your health needs. Of course, the blog has been moved to research. So let's begin. Intranasal influenza vaccine spurs strong immune response in phase 1 study. Experimental single-dose intranasal influenza vaccine was safe. Well, it's only been phase 1 study. We don't know if it's safe. Produced a durable immune response when tested in a phase 1 study published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation. The investigational vaccine called 84H5VTN is a recombinant replicating adenovirus vaccine designated to spur antibodies to hemagglutinin, a protein found on the surface of influenza viruses that attaches to human cells. So this is a new type of flu vaccine. The other types of flu vaccine, the ones that you get intramuscularly, whether they're trivalent, which means 3 strains, or quadrivalent, which means 4 strains of the strains of flu that they think are circulating for that year. It is an inactive flu vaccine, or inactive flu viron, should I say, within the influenza vaccine. And the ones that are giving intranasally, like your flu mist, it is a partially inactivated influenza viron, where this is actually a genetically modified adenovirus that's going to cause you to form antibodies to influenza. So this is a new type of influenza vaccine that has never been used before in the American public. Or at least FDA approved in the American public, should I say. It's not currently in use, this type of influenza vaccine, but they're already saying just because a phase 1 study has been published that it's safe. The investigational vaccine was developed by Emergent Biosolutions Incorporated, Gaithersburg, Maryland. It was administered intranasally, 28 study participants as an oral capsule, 10 participants, and via tonsillar swab, 25 participants, to healthy men and non-pregnant women, ages 18 to 49 years. Participants were received the vaccine intranasally or via tonsillar swab show significantly higher H5 specific neutralizing antibodies compared to the group receiving the vaccine capsule orally. Participants who received the intranasal vaccine shed viral DNA for 2 to 4 weeks, but virus could be cultured for a medium of only 1 day. So for only 1 day, you may be able to spread the adenovirus, maybe, through getting this intranasal vaccine. Just like the intranasal flu vaccine, there are studies that it is possible for you to spread the flu only through the intranasal vaccine, the flu mist. You cannot spread it through the intramuscular trivalent or quadrivalent inactive viron vaccines. Participants had evidence of H5 specific CD4 plus and CD8 plus T cell responses. Additionally, volunteers who received the intranasal vaccine had high levels of serum neutralizing antibodies at 26 weeks after vaccination. This level is unchanged at 3 to 5 years after a single intranasal dose of the vaccine. The duration of viral shedding correlated with a high magnitude of neutralizing antibody response. At week 26, in addition, the intranasal vaccine induced a mucosal antibody response in the nose, the mouth, and the rectum. Interesting, the rectum. The study's authors speculate, so this might, modify the microbiome or cause issues in the microbiome or the gut-associated lymphatic tissue or the immune system of the gastrointestinal tract. Study's authors speculate that replication competent vector vaccines may have advantages over other types of vaccines because they can express viral proteins at higher levels and for longer durations. Additionally, this type of vaccine induces a mucosal immune response that is critical for limiting transmission of viruses that infect mucosal tissues. So be on the lookout for that new influenza vaccine in the future if it does pass further trials. Iron release may contribute to cell death and heart failure. A new study shows that the release of stored iron in heart cells may contribute to heart failure, suggesting potential new approaches for treatment. Yep. Men, you need to get your iron and ferritin levels tested every year. Because unlike women, we do not get our monthly periods. We do not bloodlet. Therefore, we are able to store iron more than females are. And so, and stored iron, elevated ferritin levels, because that's, there's many different iron storage proteins, ferritin being one of the major ones. It's also an increased amount of ferritin in the body has been associated with increased inflammation, with increased liver burden and elevated liver enzymes, and increased sensitivity, allegedly, to non-native EMF radiation. So the more iron that you're carrying, the more sensitive that you might be to non-native EMF radiation, like Wi-Fi or cell phone towers or cellular phones. So you usually want to keep your ferritin levels under 100. If you're a male, you might have to do frequent blood donation for that to happen. If you hold on to iron, that might be a way to because most of the iron that we get rid of as males is either what our body uses through the production of red blood cells or for mitochondria, what's released through what little is released through urination or through defecation, and what's little is released through ejaculation. So yeah, you want to make sure that your iron levels are normal. Iron is extremely important mineral for the function of the human body. Do not get me wrong. We need it for red blood cell and hemoglobin production. However, you don't want too much of it. It can cause a lot of oxidative stress, especially to the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell. A process that releases iron in response to stress may contribute to heart failure, and blocking this process could be a way to protecting the heart, suggests a study in mice published in eLife. People with heart failure often have an iron deficiency, leading some scientists to suspect the problems with iron processing in the body may play a role in this condition. The study explains one way that iron processing may contribute to heart failure and suggests potential treatment approaches to protect the heart. Iron is essential for many processes in the body, including oxygen transport, but too much iron can lead to a buildup of unstable oxygen molecules that can kill cells. Yep, like formation of reactive oxygen species. Says first author Junpei Ito, who is a research associate at the School of Cardiovascular Medicine and scientist, King's College London, UK, at the time the study was carried out, and is now visiting scientist based on the Osaka Medical College, Japan. We already knew that the iron metabolism undergoes changes in heart failure, but it was unclear whether these changes are helpful or harmful. To learn more about the role of iron metabolism in heart failure, Ito and colleagues studied mice lacking a protein called nuclear receptor coactivator 4, which is necessary to release iron stored in cells when the body's iron levels are low. They found that these mice developed less severe changes associated with heart failure compared to mice with NCOA4. Specifically, the NCOA4 deficient mice did develop excessive levels of iron or a buildup of unstable oxygen molecules that could lead to death and heart failure. A compound called ferristatin 1 inhibits the release of stored iron and reduces the accumulation of unstable oxygen molecules. Further experiments by the team showed that treating mice with NCOA4 with ferristatin 1 can reduce the amount of cell death and heart failure. A result suggests the release of iron could be detrimental to the heart. Ito says it can lead to unstable oxygen levels, death in heart cells, and ultimately heart failure. More studies are now needed to understand each step in the process that releases iron and to test whether inhibiting this process can be beneficial to people with heart failure. Patients with heart failure who are iron deficient are currently treated with iron supplements, which previous studies have shown reduces their symptoms, adds senior author Kenya Otisu, the British Heart Foundation professor of cardiology at King's College London. While our work does not contradict those studies, it does suggest that reducing iron-dependent cell death in the heart could be a potential new strategy for heart patients. Yeah. Look into the work of Morley Robbins with the root cause protocol if you want to learn how to balance your iron levels properly. If you have oxalate issues, you might want to be careful because, even the natural vitamin C can cause oxalate issues for certain people, especially if they have cadmium toxicity, which cadmium toxicity catalyzes the conversion of ascorbic acid to oxalic acid. But, I would work to balancing your iron, making sure that, like they say, it's an iron metabolism issue. And, yeah, adding iron could help with that, but it could also cause more oxidative stress as well because the body has to find where to place to put the iron. Iron is not the answer. Increasing iron is not the answer majority of the times. It's improving iron metabolism. Lactobacillus manipulates bile acids to create favorable gut environment. Now, lactobacillus is a Firmicutes, a gram-positive bacteria. Tends to be probiotic. However, we're going to talk about one area now where it could cause issues for certain people. New research from the North Carolina State University reveals that probiotic lactobacillus bacteria use enzymes situationally to manipulate bile acids to promote their own survival in the gut. These findings further elucidate the complicated relationship between bile acids and gut bacteria and could eventually enable researchers to design lactobacilli with therapeutic properties, thereby engineering a healthier human gut environment. Bile acids are key players in digestion and overall gut health, produced in the liver and released after we eat. These acids not only break down the cholesterol and help regulate fat absorption, they also have a huge impact on the types of bacteria colonize the gut. As bile acids move through the gut, they're initially chemically modified through the addition of the amino acid, frequently glycine or taurine. That's what bioconjugation is, creating a complex conjugated bile acid pool, which conjugated bile acid makes the bile acids work better in water, so they're able to further break down fats into smaller components. Some gut bacteria have enzymes called bile salt hydrolases, which can cleave or deconjugate these amino acids from the bile acids, allowing other bacteria to further transform the bile acids as they continue through the colon. These transformations affect the bile acid's toxicity, which in turn affects the ability of different bacteria to survive in the gut. The assumed relationship that the probiotic bacteria like lactobacillus have BSHs that just deconjugate the bile acid, rendering it less toxic and allowing bacteria to thrive, says Casey Theriot, associate professor of infection disease at NC State and corresponding co-author of a paper describing the work. But the reality is a lot more complex. These enzymes are more specific than we thought. Depending on which BSH is there and which bile acid acts on, you can shape the gut in different ways, making it more or less hospitable to bacteria or pathogens. The interplay between bile and bacteria have a huge impact on the ability to live, thrive, or die in a very competitive environment, says Rodolphe Berinugu. Todd R. Kleinhammer, distinguished professor in probiotics research at NC State and co-corresponding author of the work, so he set out to further investigate that relationship. Theriot, Berinugu, and Matthew Foley, a postdoctoral research scholar at NC State and the first author of the paper, did both in vitro and in vivo experiments to determine how and whether BSHs reduce bile acid toxicity. First, they looked at the growth of the two strains of lactobacillus in the presence of different bile acids and were surprised to find that conjugated glycine or taurine played a big role in determining the toxicity of a given bile acid. The BSHs were then isolated and biochemically studied to determine whether they were more or less effective on specific bile salts and whether they could affect the survival of lactobacilli when grown in the presence of bile salts. They found that bile acid toxicity was not merely dependent upon whether the bile acid was conjugated or deconjugated by BSH. Rather, the relationships were dependent upon the type of bile acid, the bacteria being acted upon, and which BSH was present. When we altered the BSH composition of these lactobacillus strains, their tolerance to the bile acid and thus their competitive fitness were also altered. Berinugu says. The BSH enzymes have diverse properties. Bacteria pick up and drop off enzymes regularly. Sometimes they pick up enzymes that will help them survive, make bile acid less toxic. They pick up an enzyme that will hurt the competition. So the relationship between bacteria, BSHs, and bile acids aren't just one-to-one. This knowledge could help us strategize ways to improve human health by extending the lifespan of beneficial microbes or preventing the colonization of pathogens. We're going to try and design a gut microbiome in the future. We really have to understand all layers, bacteria, enzymes, and bile acids, and their situational relationships, Theriot says. This work is a big first step in that direction. BSHs are just one tool the lactobacilli use to adapt life inside the competitive intestinal tract, Foley says. Our future work will further our knowledge of bacterial-modified bile and its consequences for our health. Okay, so if you get a gut test and you have high levels of an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, you might have some, if your stools are yellow, from fat, or your anus burns and your stools are yellow from bile not being properly reabsorbed, or your stools are pale. They're not dark brown as they should be. You might have some bile deconjugation going on and improper bile production or utilization by the human body, and some of that bile deconjugation could be coming from bacteria themselves. Now, lactobacillus, we know, are generally probiotic. But in some people, with this light of information, of course, we need more, studies to replicate this. Probiotic supplements with lactobacillus in people with bile issues or people with high beta glucuronidase levels may have issues if you start supplementing with lactobacillus. So that's something to take note of. It's not 100%, but it's something to at least take note that if someone's having fat malabsorption or fat digestion issues, if you give them a lactobacillus supplement and they start feeling worse, then that might be why. Because lactobacillus are deconjugating the bile. They're separating the taurine and the glycine from the bile acids. In transhumanist news, a new kind of wearable health device will deliver real-time medical data to those with eye or mouth diseases, according to Wanyu, Larry, Chang, Dorothy Quiggle, career development professor in the Penn State Department of Engineering Science and Mechanics. Chang recently published a paper in Microsystems and Neuroengineering on the new micro and nano device technology that could revolutionize how certain health conditions are monitored and treated. We sought to create a device that collects both small and large substances or biofluids such as tears or saliva, which can be analyzed for certain conditions on a rapid, continuous basis rather than waiting on test results from samples in a lab, he said. Scissors could be placed near the tear duct or mouth to collect samples, which then produce data viewable of the user's smartphone or sent to the doctors, according to Chang. Oh boy. But a device like this would have to be discreet, soft, and comfortable for a patient to agree to wear it, and will have to be a low-cost option for patients. The tears and saliva sensing technology could help manage diseases like oral ulcers, oral cancer, eye wrinkles, and oral or eye infections like keratitis, which is inflammation of the clear tissue in the front of the eye. Last year, Cheng published on a similar wearable skin patch that collects sweat and tests for pH, sodium, and glucose levels. It was helpful for those with hypoglycemia or diabetes. The new device not only collects data, but also administers medicine with a microneedle through the skin around the eye, mouth, or tongue. Through nano to microsteel ports on the device, we can probe the cell to deliver molecular drugs for treatment in a very efficient process at the cellular level, Cheng said. Conversely, the ports can allow us to get access to the gene encoding information on the cell. Wow, so you can get your genetic information. That's all going to be, broadcast to your smartphone. You're going to have some nano devices that are going to emit their own low-level, probably Bluetooth, non-native EMF, and it's going to have your genetic data transporting to your smartphone that can easily be hacked. Or I don't know about this, man. The researchers developing working prototypes are in talks with local manufacturers as well as National Institutes of Health and Amazon for manufacturing a device on long scale. That means it's going to happen. NIH and Amazon? Oh boy. This is a mature technology with a lot of interest behind it, Chang said. Of course. There are many possible uses for a device if it makes a commercial marketplace. With future support from the National Science Foundation, Ching hopes to extend the technology to other applications as well. There's strong motivation for us to apply similar sensing devices in the future, he said. Yeah. I'm good. Hyaluron, which is hyaluronic acid, is effective in treating chronic lung disease. Oh boy. Researchers at the National Institute of Health and their collaborators have found that inhaling and fragment hyaluron improves lung function in patients suffering from the severe exacerbation of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Hyaluron, a sugar secreted by living tissue that acts as a scaffolding for cells, is used as cosmetic skin moisturizer and a nasal spray to moisturize lung airways. Yeah, but it's also used to help with joints. It helps with the fluid in your joints. I mean, if you have joint issues, it might be a good idea to take some hyaluronic acid capsules. And see if that helps improve pain. Just to see. I mean, it's worth a shot. If I'm looking up, if I remember correctly, yes, your synovial fluid, which is the fluid that is in between your joints, kind of keep your joints from rubbing against each other, the bone. Has a high amount of hyaluronic acid in it. So, people with joint pain, people with spinal pain, people with, you have your bones rubbing against one another, you could try to supplement with hyaluronic acid. Make sure it's a high-quality supplement. I think Jarrow has a good one, if I remember. And it can help. It can help improve your life. It can help reduce pain and inflammation of the joints. And now we're learning that inhaling it can help a person possibly with maybe COPD, maybe asthma, maybe should be studied for asthma or reactive airway disease. Um, okay. He uses a treatment, Hyaluron, shorten the amount of time for COPD patients in intensive care needed breathing support, decrease the number of days in the hospital, and save money by reducing their hospital stay. A study published online in Respiratory Research is a good example of how examining the impacts of environmental pollution on the lungs can lead to viable treatments. Several years ago, co-author senior Stavros Garant Ziotis, medical doctor, medical director of the Clinical Research Unit in the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, part of the NIH, showed that exposure to pollution causes hyaluron in lungs to break down into smaller fragments. These fragments irritate lung tissues and activate the immune system, leading to the constriction and inflammation of the airways. He determined that inhalation of healthy, unfragmented hyaluron reduces inflammation by outcompeting the smaller hyaluron fragments. See, this is actually, the NIH isn't doing the researchers within the NIH aren't doing completely evil things, all right? This is something good. This is something that could be used. Now, do I think it'll ever become a medicine? I don't know, because you can't patent hyaluronic acid. But it's something to take note that maybe even you can get a hyaluronic nasal spray, and you're going to breathe some of that in when you breathe in through your nose, so some of that's going to get into your lungs. Or maybe taking hyaluronic supplements are systemic. They do enter the bloodstream. So, I mean, hopefully, there's more studies, and this does turn out to be something that can help people with COPD, or people with asthma, or people with reactive airway disease. Garant Ziotis offered an analogy for how the inflammation occurs. He said, hyaluron surrounds cells like mortar surrounds bricks. Introducing pollution causes cracks in the mortar, breaking it into smaller chunks. It's true. These smaller chunks irritate the body and activate the immune system, leading to inflammation, Garant Ziotis said. Reintroducing the full-length hyaluron, like a fresh coat of mortar, means it's less irritating and reduces the amount of inflammation. Since hyaluron was approved in Italy for airway moisturization, Garant Ziotis worked with colleagues in Rome to see if inhalation of full-size hyaluron could improve lung function in critically ill COPD patients. He explained that the patients were using a breathing apparatus similar to the continuous positive airway pressure CPAP machine to treat their active exacerbation of COPD. This apparatus provided breathing support by blowing air into the airways through a mask. They do have negative pressure machines. They're biphasic cuirasses. I was looking into their use for Abel, my son, when he was still living. They work. There was an issue with supposedly maybe with iron lungs, reducing lung capacity and weakening the muscles to breathe and weakening the diaphragm. But these cuirasses are like suits of armor because we breathe through negative pressure. We don't breathe through positive pressure. When you inhale and exhale, when you inhale, that's negative pressure. You're sucking in. You're not forcing air down into your lungs. So we breathe by negative pressure. We don't breathe by positive pressure, which a CPAP machine is positive pressure. It's pushing air into your lungs. And so that causes problems. It causes problems with air going down into the stomach more. There's many people with CPAP machines that talk about having bloating and gastrointestinal issues. Inflammation of the lungs themselves through too much pressure and positive pressure. So hopefully there'll be more research into using negative pressure biphasic cuirasses, kind of look like a suit of armor almost, and ways that we could make them cheaper and less cumbersome. That would be the future of improving breathing, in my opinion, for people who have issues breathing, or even the future of sleep apnea treatment. Even though you might have to do positive pressure with sleep apnea, though, however, because you have to force the airway open. But we'll see in these studies. Inhaled hyaluron qualifies as a stimulating aid for patients with exacerbated COPD, as it is safe and easy to administer, said co-senior author Raphael Incalzi, medical doctor, Department of Medicine, Campus Biomedical University and Teaching Hospital, Rome, Furthermore, it acts locally only in the bronchial tree and thus cannot interfere with any systemic drug. That's good. Garant Ziatis also wanted to know what he was producing airway constriction in the lungs of CMP. What was producing? Okay, airway constriction in the lungs of COPD patients. He theorized that thick mucus may be involved. Collaborating with scientists at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, they grew airway cells from emphysema patients in culture. And look how mucus moved in the cells. So the mucus flowed more easily after administering hyaluron. So it may help with people with infectious diseases too. Co-author Stephen Rowe, or wow, maybe even one of the true genetic autoimmune condition, cystic fibrosis. Co-author Stephen Rowe, medical doctor, director of the Gregory Fleming James Cystic Fibrosis. That's funny. I'd even read that part, just mention it. Research Center at UAB said if patients with severe COPD took hyaluron, the treatment would improve mucus transport, aid in their recovery. Yeah, it would. Current treatment of lung disease include inhaled steroids, antibiotics, and bronchodilators. So using the molecule that's already found in the body is a new concept. Imagine that. God gave us ways for our body to function better. I mean, who could imagine that? The goal now for Garant Ziatis is to study this treatment in more patients in the United States so you can understand the optimal conditions and dosing that produce the most benefit. Bleeding gums may be a sign you need more vitamin C in your diet. It could also be a sign that you don't brush your teeth enough or practice proper oral care. Look at the last video on ways to practice proper oral care. Current advice from the American Dental Association tells you that if your gum bleeds, maybe you should brush and flossing twice a day because it could be a sign of gingivitis, early stage of periodontal disease. And that might be true. So if you're concerned, see your dentist. However, a new University of Washington study suggests you should check your intake of vitamin C. Yep. Also, people with oxidative stress of their mitochondria and reduced CoQ10 and ubiquinol production leads to bleeding gums too as well. People under a large amount of oxidative stress. And there are some toothpaste with CoQ10 and ubiquinol that reduce gum bleeding and heal the gums. Supplementing with ubiquinol 2, Jarrow 100 milligrams with breakfast. Finish one bottle would improve healthy gums. Would stop gum bleeding too as well. So yeah, vitamin C, as long as you can tolerate it and it doesn't turn into oxalic acid and cause joint pain. You want to take it buffered with sodium or calcium. You don't want to take it straight up, or you want to get in a whole food form. You want to take ascorbic acid mixed with water because it'd be kind of acidic, may irritate the gums or the teeth. It's got to be buffered. But yeah, one of the side effects of low vitamin C is scurvy. It's gum inflammation and bleeding of the gums and losing of teeth. So, yeah. When you see your gums bleed, the first thing you should think about is not, I should brush more. You should try to figure out why your gums are bleeding. And vitamin C deficiency is one possible reason. So the study's lead author, Felipe Hujol, a practicing dentist and professor of oral health sciences in the UW School of Dentistry. Hujol's study, published February 1st in Nutrition Reviews, analyzed published studies of 15 clinical trials in 6 countries involving 1,140 predominantly healthy participants. And data from 8,210 U.S. residents surveyed in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. The results showed that bleeding of the gums on gentle probing or gingival bleeding tendency, and also bleeding in the eye or retinal hemorrhaging were associated with low vitamin C levels in the bloodstream. And the researchers found that increasing daily intake of vitamin C in those people with low vitamin C plasma levels helped to reverse these bleeding issues. Of potential relevance, says Hujol, who is an adjunct professor of epidemiology in the UW School of Public Health, both a gum bleeding tendency and retinal bleeding could be a sign of general trouble in one's microvascular system, or a microvascular bleeding tendency of the brain, heart, and kidneys. The study does not imply the successful reversing of an increased gingival bleeding tendency with vitamin C will prevent strokes or serious health outcomes. Hujol stresses, however, the results do suggest that vitamin C recommendations designed primarily to protect against scurvy, a deadly disease caused by extremely low vitamin C levels, are too low, and that such a low vitamin C intake can lead to bleeding tendency, which should not be treated with dental floss. It's true. Consequently, Hujol does not recommend people attempt to keep an eye on their vitamin C intake through incorporation of non-processed foods. Such as kales, peppers, or kiwis in your diet, and if you can't find powdered foods rich in vitamin C, to consider a supplement of 1 to 200 milligrams a day. That's pretty good advice. if someone is on a specialized diet, such as paleo diet, it's important that they take a look at their vitamin C intake. Very true, who Joel said. This guy is knowledgeable in nutrition. Vitamin C fruits such as kiwis or oranges are rich in sugar and thus typically eliminated from a low-carb diet. This avoidance may lead to vitamin C intake that is too low and associated with increased bleeding tendency. Yeah, that happened to Paul Jaminet, my mentor at Perfect Health Diet. He went on a zero-carb diet and ended up getting scurvy. People who exclusively eat lean meats and avoid offal, vitamin-rich organ meats, may be particularly high risk for low vitamin C intake. Association between gum bleeding and vitamin C levels were recognized more than 30 years ago. In fact, 2 studies co-authored by the former dean of the UW School of Dentistry, Paul Robertson, published in 1986 and 1991, identified gum bleeding as a biological marker for vitamin C levels. However, this connection somehow got lost in the dental conversations about around bleeding gums. Of course it did. Of course, knowledge of nutrition. We don't need that. No. Now just constantly put fluoride on the teeth, poison the human, drink fluoride, make sure fluoride accumulates in the body. That's the way to go. Nuke the microbiome of the mouth with triclosan or alcohol and Listerine or Lysol, which is benz. I can never pronounce. I can never pronounce this word, but it's the main ingredient in modern Lysol. I'm just gonna call it benz chloride. It's benzalkonium chloride. So use that as an antimicrobial agent in the mouth. It really gets to me. There was a time in the past where gingival bleeding was more generally considered to be a potential marker for a lack of vitamin C, but over time it has been drowned out or marginalized by this overattention and treating a symptom of bleeding with brushing or flossing rather than treating the cause, Hugh Gill said. Yep. Hugh Gill's literature review also determined that retinal hemorrhaging and cerebral strokes are associated with increased gingival bleeding tendency and that vitamin C supplementation reverses the retinal bleeding associated with low vitamin C plasma levels. So missing the possible connection between gum bleeding and low levels of vitamin C has the potential to have serious health consequences. The study authors write a default prescription of oral hygiene and other periodontal interventions to treat microvascular pathologies, even if partially effective. Reversing gingival bleeding, as suggested in this meta-analysis, is risky because it does not address any potential morbidity and mortality associated with the systemic microvascular-related pathologies. Extremely interesting study. Good job. That's good science right there. That's good science. There is good science out there. It's not all bad. Okay. By some I'd be called anti-scientist or anti-scientist. No, there is good research. There is good replication of the scientific method. Okay, there is. It does exist. And finally, legal cannabis stores linked to fewer opioid deaths in the United States. Now, I am not a fan of the recreational use of any drug, caffeine or marijuana. I understand that some are worse than others, obviously. I do understand. Now, however, using cannabis for a medical need, as you would use opioids as a proper medical need, I understand the use of it of medicine. So if you have cancer and you want to try Rick Simpson oil, go right ahead. If you have chronic pain that can't be fixed and you've tried everything, you've tried diet, it's a structural issue, you've used cold laser, you've done everything you possibly can, but the chronic pain is still there. And in my opinion, it would be better to use cannabis for the pain than it would be to use opioids. So people may disagree with me on that, but that's how I feel. I think it could be used for medicine. I would not recommend anyone to smoke marijuana recreationally. I don't either. I don't do it. I haven't done it in 10 years. I don't plan on doing it. I don't drink alcohol. I very rarely drink caffeine. I very rarely eat dark chocolate, which has a little bit of caffeine in it. So I don't. But if we're doing by less harm, okay, and that's how medicine should be done. It should be done by less harm. Marijuana for pain is by less harm than synthetic opioids. Okay? Opioids are morphine-type drugs that relieve short-term acute pain and the pain at the end of life. There's little evidence that they are helpful for long-term chronic pain. That is true. But they're often prescribed for this reason. has led to widespread misuse and a sharp rise in overdose deaths, particularly in the United States. In 2018, there were more than 46,000 fentanyl-related deaths, representing over two-thirds of all U.S. opioid-related deaths that year. Some studies have suggested that increased access to cannabis, stores legally authorized to sell medical and recreational cannabis, may help to reduce opioid-related deaths, but the evidence so far is mixed. To explore this further, researchers examined relationships between medical and recreational cannabis stores and opioid-related deaths from 2014 to 2018. Their findings were based on data for 812 counties, the 23 U.S. states that allowed legal cannabis dispensaries to operate by the end of 2017. Information on state-level cannabis legislation was combined with county-level data on licensed dispensaries and opioid-related mortality rates. After controlling for population characteristics and other potential influential factors, the researchers found that counties with a higher number of active cannabis dispensaries were associated with reduced opioid-related mortality rates. According to this estimate, an increase from 1 to 2 dispensaries in a county was associated with an estimated 17% reduction in all opioid-related mortality rates. Wow. Of course, we need more studies, but that's a big difference. That's a statistically significant difference. The Association for Medical and Recreation Dispensaries and appeared particularly strong for deaths associated with synthetic opioids other than methadone, with an increased estimation 21% reduction in mortality rates associated with increased risk of 1 or 2 dispensaries. An increase from 2 or 3 dispensaries was associated with a further 8.5% reduction in all opioid-related mortality rates. The study is the first to examine association between active cannabis dispensary operations and opioid-related mortality rates at the more fine-grained county level. However, this research are observational, so can't establish cause, and the researchers stressed that while cannabis is generally thought to be less addictive than opioids, it still carries potential harms and public safety risks should not be ignored. That's true. But to say that their findings suggest a potential association between increased prevalence of medical and recreational cannabis dispensaries and reduced opioid-related mortality rates, so there's a potential association. They call for greater understanding of the impact of cannabis legislation on opioid misuse and public health outcomes before policymakers weigh the potential benefits against the harms of promoting cannabis legalization. Look, cannabis is safer for chronic pain and inflammation and cancer than opioids ever would be. Okay? It is what it is. Hey, Miss Ostrich. Cabbage, homemade sauerkraut's very high in vitamin C. Yes, it is. And you also need vitamin C for collagen production. Yep, so true. Among other things. Okay, everybody, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Take care.